Hi everyone. I have today one of the oldest digital cameras, a fully working Minolta RD175 that was made in 1995 in Japan, and it was the first portable digital camera, by which we mean it wasn't permanently connected to an external power source. It has 3 sensors totaling 1.5 megapixels and a shutter speed of between 1/2000th of a second and half a second, ISO up to 800. This was given to me by a family member who at the time was working for the police, shooting pictures of dead people, which is just to say this was a professional model. It cost about 10 grand at the time, and it was really advanced and it was really awesome. Oddly enough, it also records EXIF information, unlike significantly newer cameras like the 40D, 50D Canon, neither of which do. And it gives a good feedback on how the pictures were taken, not the least because there is no LCD. So this is a lot similar to old-fashioned analog cameras with a digital back, which really it's what it is, rather than a proper modern digital camera. In terms of functionality, it used to be connected with an SCSI port, and it also used to work with 131 megabyte hard disk, which although it still works, I can't power it up because it needs 700 milliamps of power, and because I can't connect it through this because it's way too old, I ended up buying a card reader, which is USB, and it only does 500 milliamps. So essentially I ended up getting an old-fashioned card port, and it also has a 512 megabytes compact flash card, which then goes through this whole thing. The card itself has to be formatted from an image, and it has to be formatted to be about 250 megabytes, otherwise it doesn't work. The camera just powers up and then says no. The battery is the Sony 550, which makes it quite cool because they're easy to get on Amazon. The camera has a built-in flash, and it also takes external flash. It has 3 batteries. That's the big one, the 550, and one here, and the small one here. Also, it works with any A-type lens, and therefore you could put, significantly more modern Sony lenses onto it if you wanted to. It would work. It has a 2-factor crop, so the camera here is a 35-70 lens with autofocus, and it will behave much like 70 to 140, which is why I decided to do a comparison of this one with my Nikon D810 and the 70-200 Mark III. The idea being that both of them are professional cameras of their age, and in all fairness, that's the thing I have at home. So rather than trying to compare it against shooting with a phone or any such thing, I figured this one's a bit more sensible. So what will happen in later parts of the video will be that I'll go out and use a proper camera to do the videos. I'll actually have one of my friends doing the video for me, and I'll do a few shots outdoors, do a few random pictures in the park, bit of architecture, even necros if I can, and then hop into a cafe just to do indoor shots and see how they come out, come back home and do the edit, do the comparison, and I'll show you how they come out. And then if you find the material interesting, drop a few comments and I'll try to answer any questions you may have, and it should be fun. The weather is decent, London weather, but at least it's not raining. And yeah, see how it goes and enjoy the show. Okay, so we are here at Pontoon Dock, which is in East London, and part of the view is the old Millennium Mills and Canning Town behind us. So I'll take a few pictures here with both the Minolta, and I'll get the Nikon out for comparison purposes, and then we'll walk out to Thames Valley Park. Take a few shots there. It might or might not be colourful at this time of the year, and then on the way back we can pop into a Starbucks and just do the usual indoorsy food, coffee shots, and just basically see how the two cameras compare to each other and how the whole thing performs. So follow us and we'll get going. Part of the issue that we might have is that the Minolta isn't particularly good at feeding back what settings it's shooting on. So as much as it has a PASM mode, because the two sensors are really different and a lot of time has gone on between when they were manufactured, it's actually very difficult to have identical shots. The Minolta only goes as far as ISO 800 and it has a double crop. So I'll just shoot both of them on P mode and see how it comes out in the end, rather than lining up the individual settings totally. The other thing is that obviously the Nikon is significantly newer, the lens are more professional lens, whereas the Minolta used to be a really high-end camera at the time, but it's not a valid comparison for an identical comparison, so we'll just see how it goes. I'll take a few shots here and then we'll get going. We found these cute mushrooms just near the Thames Valley Park, so we'll try to do macro shots, and obviously neither of these lenses are macros. I have a macro for the Nikon in my backpack, but we're not going to take that out, so we'll see how it goes. I can only do P mode, and of course there's not much feedback on how it's going, but you know, see what it does. So that still works. I'll get a bit closer. No idea what it's doing, because yeah, I think that's too close. The minimum is half a meter, which is about 15 feet. So I think that's as close as it gets, really. See what this does. Okay, we're out here in Thames Valley Park and it's a bit windy. I'll try to take a few shots. My idea was that I've set the mode to A and then set the aperture to 6.7 and try to do a few shots, so both of them are in 6 point something, and then see for comparison's sake, and we can compare them at home. I'll do a few in each direction, because on the one hand we have strong sun, on the other hand it's a bit of architecture, and then on the other way out we have more colors. And as usual, there's no LCD on the back, so I don't know what the camera is doing, but it's always good fun. And try not to be blown away by the wind. So let's just get going on that. So I think the camera was trying to tell me that it was trying to shoot at 1/2000th of a second, which was way too bright for it. So I'll set it to f11, see if it likes it a bit more. That should work. It's 1/750th, so f11 now. What's actually quite interesting, that this one, the Minolta, is trying to shoot at 1/2000th of a second on f11, whereas the Nikon is quite happy shooting on 1/500th. So I think it's just how it handles the time that's gone by over the past 20 odd years. I'll try to up it to f19 and see what happens. Okay, so now it's 1,000th of a second. I kind of assume they're going to be horrendous pictures, but you never know. And then I'll do a few shots in that direction, which is hopefully more colorful. Take it down to f9. And that should work at 750. Way too windy. So we're back indoors. Found the Starbucks, and the original idea was to do the cutesy love hearts coffee food porn sort of stuff, but actually Starbucks made a rather ugly bit of coffee for us, so we'll just drink it. So I want to check out how it performs indoors, and we'll be still using the coffee cups and my ear warmers, which are nice and orange. And amusingly enough, the lens says this is now in macro range. So I'm curious how that goes, and you might not see it much in the video, but here it will tell us that we have 183 shots left, and it also tells me how it's going to shoot. So at the moment it's trying to do f6.7 and 1/8 of a second, which obviously there is no LCD feedback. I've also changed the lens on the Nikon to get a macro lens and just stick to f8, so the two are in line, and just see what that does. And it's looking at 1/80th of a second, obviously about 4,000 ISO. I could set it to, let's say, 800. And I can try to do a few more zoomed in, and then we'll do a few around here just to show how it works indoors really. So I'll zoom into 70mm, which is 140 equivalent, and see what comes out. And I'm doing my ear warmers. So I think it's 1/10 of a second at 6.7, and so 140 mils 6.3 ISO 800. It's 1/25th of a second. See how it goes. So I'll do a few around here, and that's going to be the indoors part. And once we get home, I'll do the comparison. So I'll take a picture of my dear video guy. Smile! Yay! And I'll do one generally just like an indoorsy stuff. There you go, random people smiling, and do it the same way. 6.7, smile again, yay. And just one around here with a completely different random customer. I'll do another one that was shit. Okay, so that kind of covers the indoor part. We'll look at home how it came out. So one of the things about this one is that it has really weird f values. As I said when we were out in the park, it tends to shoot like f19 or f20 something, and one of the conversations we had was that maybe back when this was done in 1995, they probably had a few ideas about what might be relevant for whoever uses it. So if you think like a Canon 50D, which is comparatively new stuff, it doesn't put the EXIF info into the JPEG file, whereas this one does. Hence I know it shoots a lot of weird values, and it's actually quite useful to look back on how it was done. Now I imagine people back in those days didn't really need the EXIF values, they didn't really need to know how they had the photos shot, but it could have been a useful thing. Remember, this was a $10,000+ professional camera, first of its kind, and the fact that it could do 100+ pictures and 1.5 megapixels, that was probably OMFG at the time. And I think I mentioned that I got the camera from my dad, who worked for the police shooting pictures of dead people, which shows the sort of professional use it was really garnering at the time, rather than the take-home camera to shoot pictures of your baby. So it's actually quite fun to compare it to something that's more up-to-date, as much as the D810 is already about 7 or 8 years old, I think. But yeah, that concludes the indoor part, and we might do a few more shots outside, and we'll do a bit more material once we get home and just have a look at the pictures and just a few comments and just see how it goes. So let's move on, and I'll turn this one off. Okay, so we're back home now, and I split the pictures according to basically being grouped up. So O1 goes together, O2 goes together, and these are all straight out of the camera. The Nikons have been shrunk down, and they are from the JPEG, and they're the same size more or less as the Minolta pictures. The Minoltas have been saved as TIFF, and in a bit I'll show you afterwards also what's in the mod folder, which is just stuff that has been sent through the Adobe Photoshop automated settings. And apologies for the slightly different monitor aspect ratio. This is the one I'm using, so I appreciate this is different from the rest of the video, but we'll all just have to live with that. So I'll zoom out, and then I'll go through each of these and I'll annotate it. So let's go. Actually, before I just do that, yes, I do want to change that. No, okay, they can't be rotated, never mind. Cool, yes, I don't care. So that one is Nikon, and you see the difference flipping back to the Nikon. A lot more color, a lot more detail, and Nikon was shot on 92mm, and I did say there is an EXIF. I was kind of wrong about that, but I know it comes up at some point. I'm reasonably sure if I go here, oddly enough, as it goes through Photoshop, it gets saved. So I'll show you these when we're really back on the modified ones. For now, just let's do the original one. So that's the Minolta sensor, a bit dirty, and yeah, it's a bit less detail. Moving on to the second one, again, this one's the Nikon, and pretty much the same idea. So fewer colors, less detail, and yeah, it's just how the sensor is. I mean, obviously the 70-200 is a significantly better lens, but I think a lot of this is just the sensor. What would be interesting is to compare this against the phone, especially some of the older phones, and my idea was to include a Samsung S5 in the comparison, but that is 24mm equivalent, whereas this is 70, so I figured there's no point. Third picture, still outdoors, still near pontoon docks. That's the Nikon. That's actually, I mean, obviously not identical, but that's significantly closer to the Nikon quality, at least more so than the previous ones, which is interesting. That's my friend who was doing the video. Again, that's a Nikon shot, and that's the Minolta. So yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because you have a different type of loss of detail. So with the Nikon, Obviously the fluff is a lot better. The resolution of per, I don't know, whatever unit the lens uses is a lot higher. But then I think the blacks are closer to reality on this one. Maybe not. I'm not convinced. That's Nikon again. And just see in the corners how one thing is that the color temperature is different on the two, and this has to do with the Minolta has 3 sensors, but it's tilted towards a green-blue hue, and that's because how the sensors are, whereas the Nikon is, you know, newer technology. And living here, I know for a fact that these colors are significantly closer to reality than these ones. It's a lot less blue tilt. Also, this was shot on 1/80th, and I'm looking at the bank sign being slightly better, but I'm tempted to believe it might just be a small shift in just how it was shot at the time, rather than shutter speed. That's the mushroom. And again, I wasn't using a macro lens even though I had one, because I figured if I shoot macro that's totally unfair. So again, that's the Nikon, and the Minolta is closer, or it's more zoomed in, and pretty much the same idea. Significantly less detail, significantly fewer colors, and a shift towards a bluish greenish hue. Then this is the same spot as where we had the mushroom. Nikon again, and I know this is horrendous, it's not been shifted, but I mean rotated, and apologies for that. I can't actually rotate these because it's a TIFF, so yeah, that's how it is. But the same idea, you get, you know, a white out in the sky here and solar flare, and the solar flare is actually quite significant on this one. But going back to the Nikon, at least that one's been taken care of. And this was shot f6.3, and just see how I was focusing somewhere here, so this is a lot more blurry as it should be, whereas with the Minolta, although it was shot at, I'll tell you what later, but you know, at least 6.7, because that's the least it can do, you have absolutely no decent gradual depth change, which is interesting. That's the Thames Valley, Nikon, and Minolta. Again, same thing, realistic colors, decent detail, crappy colors, crappy detail. And this was against the sun pretty much, and the reason why I wanted to shoot this as much as it's a horrendous idea to do so is just to demonstrate how the Minolta responds to being right into the sun. And it's a lot of white out, and the Nikon shot this on 1/500th at 11. I think this was the one where I said it was trying to do 1/2000th of a second, and it just became upset about that. But we'll check the modified ones, because that has the EXIF, and it also just shows what Photoshop makes of it. And so that's towards the other direction, slightly more colors. Again, this is the Nikon, and it's almost decent. There's a significant loss of colors as usual, but you know, it's not that horrendous. Moving on, that was supposed to be the lovely coffee hearts, that sort of junk pictures, but then Starbucks made a horrendous looking coffee, which is fine. So we're just shooting the ear warmers, and yeah, this is significantly worse, as a lot worse whiteout, and highlights are too bad, and there's a significant loss of color with the orange. Going back to this one, yeah, at least you see what's in the picture. With this one, it's just a white blurb. This is my ear warmers, and heads up, next one's going to be not rotated, but you get the idea by now. It's the same thing. Again, that's Lajos, and that was Nikon not really focusing on his face. And yeah, same thing. It's out of focus as a motion blur and the total loss of detail. That was the indoors in Starbucks, and yeah, it's not rotated, but you get the idea. Shift it towards blue, genetic loss of detail, usual stuff. So now I'll show you the ones that have been sent to Photoshop, and the same idea. And now I should be able to rotate these guys, hopefully. Yes, good. And well, just let's get on with it. So again, this is Nikon, and you have the EXIF info, finally. And you know, it's like almost okay. Oddly enough, the Minolta decided to shoot this on f16. The Nikon, I set it to 6.3, but I'm reasonably sure, you know, it being ISO 100, which is what it defaults to, I think this is what Nikon would have chosen more or less. Clearly there's a lot better detail in the EXIF as well. But hey, at least the Minolta has some EXIF, which is awesome. And moving on, again, Nikon, I think there's always going to be a loss, not a loss of colors, and obviously the loss of detail. And Minolta sticks to f16 125. Nikon has been forced to be a purchase priority on 6.3. Yeah, you get the idea. It's actually decent colors. I mean, I genuinely think it goes in line with a normal cell phone that would have been a few years ago. And you know, Photoshop could be forced, this was automatic, but I'm sure I could force it to up the saturation and up the contrast. But it's interesting to see, and slightly weird values on 1/80th of a second f13. And yeah, I'm just going to scroll through these, and you see what's going on really. We get some of the colors back though. Remember how blue all this stuff was here, and now it's comparatively on the same level as what the Nikon was shooting, which I think is, you know, a step forward in the right direction. And again, Nikon Nikon 1/80th, and we never know the ISO on this one, but I guess it tends to shoot around 400 or 800. And yeah, now it's been rotated, and yeah, some details are built back by Photoshop. If you look at it, you can't control where it focuses, but in general it focuses in the middle. And nonetheless, you know, depth of field is totally different from what you have on this one. And yeah, this was quite decent. So in pictures where the original quality is decent, Photoshop can adjust the colors to be relatively decent post adjustment, but then obviously you can't build a cursor out of shit, so it won't hold. And I think the same applies here. That one, yeah, highlights lost. Photoshop didn't manage to do much with it, and I'm tempted to think that that's not going to be the case. I mean, I specifically remember that was 1/2000th of a second. So let's go with the idea that, you know, take the EXIF with a large pinch of salt here. And, you know, obviously that's Nikon. Again, Nikon, the same thing pretty much. When it was decent, it was decent in Photoshop. Indoors, yeah, way too much highlight loss, and Photoshop can't do much with it. That was kind of okay. No idea where it focused, but hey. And that was also kind of okay. As a bit of a motion blur, apparently 0.13 seconds. Yeah. And then that was the last indoor picture for Starbucks, and I should rotate that one too. I'm just being silly. Yeah, so Nikon and the Minolta. Okay, that will conclude it. I was thinking about doing a night shot while I was just staying outside, but I've given up on the idea because I'm reasonably tempted to believe it's not going to be particularly special or interesting. So really, thanks for watching, and I hope it was vaguely insightful and interesting. And if you have any questions or queries, then please drop a comment. Feel free to subscribe. We'll try to do more reviews, probably of analog cameras, unless we get our hands on more of the ancient digital ones. My channel also does a whole bunch of other things, so some of the content may or may not be relevant, but see how it goes. And I'll share the Instagram feeds for both of us, just in case you feel like following things we do, which is usually decent travel photography, not the shitty one. And yeah, again, thanks for watching, and any questions, do shout please. Cheers.